If you're applying for a bunch of jobs and you're not getting any callbacks, it means your resume is probably part of the problem. It could also be your LinkedIn or your cover letter or maybe your GitHub profile. We're going to talk about that a little bit in some other videos, but this video is going to strictly focus on the resume. If you prefer reading this kind of information instead of watching YouTube videos, I have written a blog post about software engineering resumes some time ago, and I will drop a link in the description of this video below. So why am I talking about this? Over the years of working in tech, I have reviewed a lot of resumes and I've helped a lot of people get their resumes in a good shape for job applications. I think I have a pretty good idea of what a good resume looks like. Something I'd like to point out right away is that resume writing is not a perfect science. It is subjective, but I believe you could get pretty close to a perfect resume if you follow some simple guidelines. It's also important to know that a resume writing is a journey. It's not something you just do once and get it perfect one time and then that's it. The resume will evolve with your career. My resume looks wildly different today than it did just a few years ago or even a year ago. And it's not only because I may have switched jobs or had more experience. It's also because when I apply for different roles, I can track the resume performance, and if I'm not getting enough callbacks, I'm going to start tweaking things and changing it up and getting more eyes to look at my resume and give me some feedback. It's really important to understand the purpose of the resume before writing one. And I think there are two primary things that a resume does for you. First is it creates the initial impression of who you are on paper. Whoever is reviewing your resume initially is going to spend 5 seconds looking it over, skimming for keywords, trying to understand hey, does this applicant meet my bare minimum requirements for this team? The second important purpose of your resume is kind of guiding your interviewers, because whoever is going to interview you is going to spend a little bit more time through resume, and they're going to look at more in depth at all the bullet points that you put in for your work experience and projects. And that is going to sort of guide the conversation in a direction that hopefully you want it to go. The first guideline that I'm going to talk about is the length of your resume. Your resume should be one page and one page only. If you have 10 years of experience and you're applying for your 7th job in software engineering or something along those lines, this video is not for you. This is for entry-level applicants. Formatting is not how you're going to stand out from the crowd, so keep it simple. If you use a papyrus font on your resume and you're not getting any callbacks, that's on you. Dates are super important. Make sure to keep them consistent and easy to read. It's going to be the second thing most likely anybody is going to look at if they decide to spend more than 5 seconds on your resume. Unlike my YouTube videos, which are all over the place, your resume needs to be consistent. Make sure that your work experience looks like the same type of bullet points, the same type of titles, the same type of dates, and so on. That is going to make your resume a little bit easier to read, which is going to be very much appreciated by whoever is looking at it. Your resume header is essential because it's the first thing that meets the eye when somebody opens your resume. Right at the top, you want to have your full name first and last, and if you have a nickname or a preferred name, you could put it in the parentheses. That part is optional. Next line, I would include your location. A lot of recruiters will immediately ask you for your location if you did not include it. You don't need your full address. You just need a city and state. Then you want to include your contact phone number and your email, and ensure that your email sounds professional. Lastly, I would highly recommend including a link to your LinkedIn profile. As a pro tip, I highly recommend making all of your links clickable so that the person reviewing your information does not have to spend the extra few seconds copying and pasting your email and so on. Ultimately, you're trying to make the resume review experience as pleasant and as quick as possible for the person reviewing your information. Next, I'm going to talk about education section and a work section. Those will shift up and down depending on where you at in your career and education, and I'm going to circle back to that after I cover each section individually. Your education section. You want to include just the essentials like your university name, the location of your university, the degree or the program you're in, GPA if it's above 3.0. This one is sort of optional, but I would include it because in some cases they'll ask you for it. and the graduation date. This one is essential to include. Whether you're applying for an internship or a full-time role, they will most likely need to know your graduation date. If you don't know the exact graduation date, projected graduation date is fine. The recruiters will go off that, no problem. If you do not include it, they'll most likely ask you for it. And again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible for the resume reviewer. If it comes down to 2 resumes, and one resume has all the information needed and the other one doesn't, it's very likely that the recruiter will just go with the one that has all the information. Your work experience section is there for showcasing things like internships, freelance work, and really large projects. You want to stay away from including anything that's very small or the whole class did it kind of thing and that was just a school project. That doesn't go in a work experience section. Here, the goal is to showcase what sort of production-ready systems you worked on in the past. You're trying to make this work section relatable to the job or an internship that you're applying to. This is why small school projects or a tutorial that you followed is not really appropriate for this section. If it doesn't have any users, if it was meant for educational purposes, like there are other places you could put that on your resume. All right, the work experience section should have the company name, your title. I would standardize your title a little bit to the industry standards. If your company has some very specific special names, you might want to make it more basic and relatable to other companies so that people can understand at a glance what you did. Then you also want to include the dates. Month and a year is fine. You don't need a very specific date. And then the location, city and state is good to have. This section may include internships, freelance work, and large projects if you don't have enough regular work experience. However, once you do have 1 or 2 internships under your belt, I would exclude, your projects and freelancing experience from the work experience section for this type of resume. The bullet points in your work experience section are essential to making a good resume. This is a section that's both going to be reviewed by the recruiter when they first open up your resume to skim for relevant experience, but also this is a section that's going to be looked at very closely by the interviewers later on in the process, and this is the part they're going to ask you a lot of questions about. Each work experience should have about 3 to 5 bullet points, and each bullet point should talk about what you did, the impact that it had, and it is essential to quantify that impact. And lastly, you want to pack the section full of keywords. So when you're describing what you did, you might want to mention that you used Python, for example. And then for impact, when you're quantifying it, include the biggest possible number you can actually talk about and justify during an interview. Make sure that it sounds as impressive as you can make it. So the question is, which section should go where? Should it be education above the work experience, or should the work experience be above the education? The answer really depends on where you're at in your career, as I alluded to earlier. If you are applying for your first internship and you have almost no work experience to show for, then put your education at the top. However, if you have some real world work experience, I would put that section at the top and then have your education section right after that. Both are important, but the more work experience you have, the less important your education becomes. Last section of your resume. This is definitely going to be at the bottom of your resume. In this section, you're going to highlight things like volunteering, projects that are substantial enough to go on your resume, and things like leadership roles. For example, if you were a part of a student club at your college and you were taking on some leadership roles, this is a good time to put that there. Or maybe you were building a website for a charity or something like that. Pretty much any experience that you have that was unpaid but can be in some way related to the role that you're applying to will go in this section. I gotta be honest, this section is probably the likeliest to be skipped over by the recruiter or the people who are going to be interviewing you. However, it can be very, very beneficial, especially if you're lacking relevant work experience. This is the place where you could pack a lot of that additional experience that you may have had. Because there's only so much time in an interview, you will likely not get to every part of the resume. One person might ask you about just like one specific thing, and another person might ask you about just one other specific thing off your resume, and this section may never even come up. If you do want it to come up, you could certainly kind of lead the conversation in that direction and say, hey, by the way, I did this project, which was very relevant to work that I'm applying to do. One question that I've been asked a lot in the past, should I tailor my resume for a specific job? And the short answer is yes. Every job will have slightly different requirements, so you want to look at the keywords in the job description and see if you could tailor your resume a little bit there. It doesn't mean you have to rewrite it all the way. If the job requires primarily Python, then you might want to highlight those keywords a little bit more. If it requires TypeScript, then you might want to focus a little bit more on that. It could mean maybe moving up some bullet points up or down. Remember when we talked about the purpose of your resume in the beginning of the video? Well, the person who is going to be reviewing your resume likely knows nothing about you and doesn't know some of the different experience you've had in the past. They also are likely non-technical. They just kind of know to look for certain types of keywords and things like that. This means that you want your resume to paint the picture for them as fast as possible, indicating to them that, hey, this is a good candidate. Like, the engineers are going to appreciate me bringing this candidate on board for interviews because they meet the requirements that we have. You do that through your resume, and that's why tailoring your resume to a specific job a little bit and helping that recruiter kind of sell you to the team that you're going to be interviewing for is very important. Sometimes you look at a job description and you know that you're like a perfect candidate for this. Like, you have the experience, you've been around the tech that they're working with. But if you don't paint that picture correctly on your resume, then those people reviewing it are not going to know that you're perfect for that job. And your resume is really like your one opportunity to let them know that, hey, pick me, give me a call. All right, last tip, make sure you save the resume as a PDF file and have a good file name that describes what's in that file. For example, you want to do something like Roman_Taylor_resume. That way, whoever downloads that resume on their computer to look at it, they know exactly whose resume it is, and that just saves them a step from having to rename your file. All right, now that you've finished writing your resume, your next mission is to have it proofread. That means get as many eyes to look at your resume as possible. That could mean your peers, professors, career center, other individuals you know in the industry. You want to make sure that everything has been spell checked, the commas and dots are in the right place, it's very well readable, and the formatting is consistent. If you're really struggling with this and you need somebody else to look at your resume, let me know and I'll do my best to help out. I will also include my resume in my blog post. Definitely take a look if you need a reference. If you followed the tips in this video, I think you're going to do great. Let me know how it goes.